Welcome to the Way Out Recovery Hour and a happy Monday to you. I'm Bob Sheritz, and happy holidays, Merry Christmas. I just love the holiday season. I hope everybody is enjoying this very, very much. It gives us an extra opportunity to really be grateful for the things that we have and the incredible place that we live. We have an outstanding community in Santa Clarita that's really helpful to each other. If you're struggling through this holiday season, there are tons of resources for whatever you might be going through. If you're missing somebody and you need to touch base, for some grief and loss issues, we have tons of grief and loss counselors. The one that comes to mind right off the bat is Sharon Brubaker. She's a friend of mine and a really awesome grief counselor as well. If you're going through any kind of other issues, specifically mental health or substance abuse issues, ask somebody for help. You'll hear us say that a lot around here. Asking for help is the first step, but we really, really mean it. That can be oftentimes the most difficult thing to do, is we sit back and either ourselves or someone we love is suffering around us or in front of us, or we ourselves are suffering, and we sit back thinking, it'll hoping it'll get better tomorrow and not taking any action. And I'll tell you that the first action to take is picking up the phone or asking a trusted friend for help, or a counselor or a teacher or a pastor. Ask somebody for help, and that can get your foot in the door to all of the many outstanding programs that we have here in the Santa Clarita Valley. We are always around to help at the Way Out Recovery. Our phone number is 661-296-4444. You can also go on our website at thewayoutrocoveryscv.com and fill out a form to have an appointment with us, or send us an email. You can send me an email, bob@thewayoutrocoveryscv.com, or call me on my cell phone at 383-6550. If I can't help you directly, I will get you to somebody that can. There's no need to suffer unnecessarily through this holiday season or any other time, but particularly right now can be tough on people. I want to give everybody an opportunity right now. I love Mondays. I love Mondays because my perception has changed, and that's the only reason. Is I think I used to be like a lot of people, and I would sit back going, oh my God, I got all this stuff to do this week and all these appointments, and kind of dread Mondays and get into those Monday blues. But I've decided, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to make the same decision, to change your perception and take a moment to think about all the wonderful opportunities that you have coming up in front of you, all the people that you get to interact with, all the people that you might get to help, all the little projects you might get to get done, time with family. And we got this big, beautiful week sitting in front of us with all of those opportunities. And all we got to do is just sit for a moment and think about the things that we can be grateful for and the blessings in our life. And it only takes a moment. So let's take a moment to do that. We at the Way Out Recovery always welcome people dropping in as well. We are located on the corner of Plum and Bouquet Canyon, 28118 Bouquet. Right in the same shopping center as the La Casina, Vincenzo's. There's a 7-Eleven in there. We're on the same side as that 7-Eleven, all the way down at the other end. We love when we get visitors to drop in, either past clients or people that we've interacted with. I've been out here trying to provide some sort of a service to adults, adolescents, and their families for about the last 13 years personally in various organizations. And I love when somebody drops in that I've known for the last 6 or 8 or 10 years and says, hey, man, I'm doing great. Or, drops in and says, hey, I'm struggling, man, help me get back on track. And so drop on by anytime and pay us a visit. We would love to help you in any way that we can. Happy holidays, Merry Christmas. We have an outstanding show coming up for you today. One of the things that we love to do around here is to get organizations in from Santa Clarita that are helping people. I think anybody who's lived here for a long time knows that we live in one of the most probably outstanding states in the country, certainly in the area. I mean, cities in the area. And all the resources that we have and all the wonderful things that we're doing, you know, from the sheriff's department to the school district to the city of Santa Clarita to all these nonprofits and for-profits, and there's just a lot of help to be had here. And so one of the things that we made a commitment to do when we started the Way Out Recovery Hours, to have some of those people on the show and different organizations to sort of highlight what Santa Clarita is doing, but also give any of our listeners an opportunity to have those resources at their disposal. Today, so there is a group, an organization called Celebrate Recovery. Celebrate Recovery in itself has been around for a long time, but we have a local chapter, if you will, at Real Life Church. And so their Facebook page is Celebrate Recovery at Real Life. At Real Life Church. Celebrate Recovery at Real Life Church is the Facebook page, but you can also find them through the Real Life Church app or on their website and look them up. It's a 12-step program that is geared towards helping people in all forms of addiction, not just with drugs and alcohol. And it's an added bonus when I get to when one of my very dear friends is the pastor for Celebrate Recovery. So today we have Chris Freeman on with us. Hi, Chris.
Hey, guys.
And we have a show lined up for you where we're going to talk about what you guys do over at Celebrate Recovery. And then, of course, in the second part of our show, my favorite part, because it's going to remind me of what a miracle you are and the program is, and how people can recover. And so we're going to have Chris we're going to have you talk about your story as well in the second half. And that's just such a treat for me personally, you know, from a sort of maybe selfish perspective. It is a blessing and an honor and a privilege to have you on the show with me today because you're such a dear friend.
Thank you, Bob.
So thanks for being here today, Chris. All right, listeners, so don't go away. Stay tuned. Come on back. We have an awesome show lined up for you today. I'm Bob Sheritz. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour, and we'll be right back. Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I am Bob Sheritz, and very excited. If you're just joining us, we have in studio today Chris Freeman, who is the Celebrate Recovery pastor over at Real Life Church. And we are going to talk about Celebrate Recovery, which is, I kind of want to preface this. It is a 12-step program, correct?
Correct.
So they do utilize the 12 steps, which originally 80-something years ago were started by Alcoholics Anonymous. The 12 steps of AA have been used in, last count I saw was over 120 different 12-step groups. So there's a 12-step group for just about any disorder that you have or issue that you're going through, which is really awesome that those original 12 steps can branch out and be applied to so many different things. And so I kind of want to preface to say that if you are already in a 12-step program, that when we talk about different things like if we were to have a show on Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous or Pills Anonymous or Marijuana Anonymous or Celebrate Recovery, that we are not saying either go to this one or go to this one, that they work with each other. And if you're already in a 12-step program, this is something that could enhance your program as well. And it's all-encompassing, which means it's open to anybody who wants to walk through. And you can show up at Celebrate Recovery and maybe find out that this isn't the right fit for you. And cool, they will direct you to someplace else. It's very inclusive. It's not exclusive. Everybody is welcome. And so when we talk about other 12-step programs like Celebrate Recovery, I think it's important to say that don't let your mind go, it's either or, it can be both.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we talk about in providing outpatient treatment over at the Way Out is that we would like to encourage you to not only come to our outpatient program, but also go to a 12-step program, also see a therapist, also go to different support groups, get involved in different activities and anything that can enhance your recovery.
Yeah.
So Celebrate Recovery tell us a little bit about it. just in general what it is.
Yeah, well, you kind of touched on it already, Bob, but it is a 12-step based program, and you had mentioned it in the intro that it's not just for people that struggle with drugs and alcohol. Quite often, I think when people hear the word recovery, that's where your mind automatically goes. And we certainly, as it is part of my story with history of drug abuse, for people that struggle with those issues, but it's also for people that struggle with things like mental health issues, anger, codependency, people who have been abused, things like that. And the cool thing about it is kind of the way it works. I guess I can kind of walk through maybe what a normal night looks like.
Sure, yeah. So if I'm new, so first of all, let me start like this.
Sure.
7 o'clock on Fridays, right?
Yeah, 6 o'clock is our dinner, which we have every single Friday. We kind of get together and we eat.
Food brings people together.
Yeah, that's what we found. We like our dinner.
So if from what I understand, if you're brand new and you show up at 6 o'clock, dinner is free. If you've been there before, it's $5.
Correct.
Yeah, so $5 dinner. Come on, man.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, and it's usually good. We got guys that are really good cooks that have volunteered their time to do that. So,
nice.
So we love our dinner, and then 7 o'clock, our kind of regular service kind of kicks off, and
that's at Real Life Church, which is on Newhall Ranch Road.
Road, and like gosh.
Well, so
McBean.
It's kind. It is.
It's kind of McBean over there. Yeah.
So Newhall Ranch Road, Real Life Church, every Friday night, dinner at 6, and the meetings start at 7.
Correct.
So I show up at 6 o'clock and I sit down and I talk to Chris and I have a little dinner.
Yeah.
And then what's my night going to look like?
Yeah. So after dinner's done at 7 o'clock, we kick off. We'll usually start off. We have a few songs that we'll have play, and then we alternate. So one week we'll have a teaching, which I'll do, and the teaching will be based somewhere along with the 12 steps. And the teaching year, it's a year we go through the process. So we're wrapping up our season right now. We're going to kick off a new teaching season where we start back at step 1 in January.
But so just to clarify on that is, even though, so you're essentially going through kind of a step per month. So currently you're in step 12, right?
Yeah, some are shorter, some are longer, but it works out to a year.
But I can come in any time in the year? I don't have to come in January?
No, not at all. Yeah, and we always try, anytime I do my teaching, I always try to make it in a way that if it's your first night there, that there's something relatable that you can get out of it. So that's not just people that are coming in now. We're talking about, step 12 that are just kind of like, well, this just doesn't apply to me because
I'm brand new. I haven't even taken one yet.
Yeah,
right?
So we do definitely that's always in my mind and the mind of our leaders there, that we're thinking about the person that's their first time and what we can do to make them feel welcome and just to relate to them. So the 1 week we'll do a teaching, and then the next week we'll do someone that comes up and shares their story. And these are people that have been through our process of what we call a step study. So for those of the people that are familiar with kind of 12-step work in general, we do it a little different at Celebrate Recovery. The way we do it is we meet in groups, and we have these books that we have something called the Life Recovery, well, not the Life Recovery Bible, the Celebrate Recovery Bible that you kind of go through while you walk through this in the groups.
Commonly known as the Recovery Bible. I think a lot of people refer to it as that, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
And there's also these workbooks with questions in them, and you go through it in a group, and it's a committed process because it takes anywhere from 10 months to a year to actually get through. And there's pros and cons to it because in a lot of traditional 12-step organizations, you work one-on-one with someone and go through the steps, which I've found a lot of success in there as well. But there's also something that is pretty powerful in doing that kind of in a group. Yeah. And so there's a plus and minus, though, because the groups aren't always open. We can't have new groups open constantly. So we have times of the year where we open up these groups.
Okay.
So there's a, pluses and minuses there.
But I can come to Celebrate Recovery any time.
Absolutely.
I can come any time, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to be told,
no,
sorry,
no.
we already started.
No. And the step study actually going through, that happens on a different night of the week. Right. That's a different part of the process entirely. But we certainly encourage everyone that comes there to join that, because in our experience, that's when the real change and transformation happens, is going through that process.
So as a professional drug counselor, I'll tell you some of the things that I just picked up on, and as myself an active member of a 12-step program, some of the things that are beneficial across the board. What I heard you talking about was that there will be a topic or a study, which would be similar if you're in a 12-step to maybe going to a book study or a step study meeting, right, at a 12-step. And then you'll have the other week, you'll have somebody come in and tell their story, which in 12-step, very beneficial. A speaker meeting, right? I love speaker meetings because I get to sit back and listen. And you talk about the group process versus or also with an individual process. One of the beautiful things about hearing other people's story is those aha moments when I don't know about you, Chris, but here's how I felt coming in. Nobody's going to understand the problems that I'm going through.
Absolutely.
Nobody's going to understand what I've been through. Nobody gets me, because in the sort of normal world, people who haven't experienced these types of issues, that may be true. Is if I start telling my story in general public, I think I might shock some people and they'll step back and go, whoa, right? But if I do that in the recovery world, people are going, they're nodding their heads going, yes, I get it. So if I'm going to this speaker meeting or I'm going to CR and somebody is giving their testimony or telling their story, what I'm hearing is there's parts of it where it's my story too. Absolutely. And I get in there and I start to relate with that. And that is one of the most beautiful things that can happen to a person is for the first time when you sit in a group and you start going, oh my God, these people are telling my story and I belong here. And you start to have that identification take place. It almost feels like all that hopelessness, that lonely hopelessness just kind of melts away and you go, oh my God, I'm home.
Yeah.
Right?
And I couldn't agree more, Bob. There's something that's like just so powerful and impactful from living a life that a lot of times, with addiction or some of these things that people struggle with, they live it in secret and they hold on to it inside and they carry that feeling of no one will understand. No one could ever relate to this. And then to go somewhere and then to hear someone actually share that, where they get it, like where you get, like you feel it in your heart, like they understand that they've come a long way from it. It's really powerful to experience that, and that's why we have someone share their story every other week, because just like you said, to give someone that hope that might not have it is what it's all about.
So then after that happens, then you break into groups. Is that what I'm understanding? So how's that work?
Yeah. So the large group time is an hour from 7 to 8, and then you break into groups from 8 to 9. And the groups are kind of broken up. They're gender specific, so men meet with men, women meet with women. Most of celebrate recovery is gender specific. We just found that it's better to.
Well, and let me touch on that a little bit, because that's really important in just about any 12-step. It's not. There's no rule, there's no law, there's nothing that says that you can't have like a sponsor of a different gender. Right. However, just the nature of the vulnerability and the transparency and dare I say intimacy that takes place in the step process, that I might be talking about things of a sexual nature or things of that a man is going to understand a little better. And so and in the middle of that vulnerability and intimacy and transparency, if I'm with somebody of another gender, those feelings that are going to come up could be misconstrued. Correct. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
And so I don't ever we don't want it to become that kind of a relationship.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so when I couldn't agree with you more on that, Bob. And when we break into groups, the groups are segmented. So people that struggle with things like drugs and alcohol will meet in a group, a men's group. Men that struggle with anger will meet in another group. We have groups for codependency, sexual integrity for men, so people that struggle with sexual addiction, and then the women have their own groups as well. Right. But the cool thing is when we actually do the step study process, that part of it that meets on a different night of the week for the people that can do that, these people from all these different groups will join in the same step study group. So it's not just people that struggle with drugs and alcohol or with people that struggle with drugs and alcohol. They'll be with people that struggle with anger, people who have been abused, all different types of people. And the really cool thing about it is the questions, they really they dig. And one of the neat things that happens as a part of this process is a lot of people come to realize that at the heart of all these issues, it's a lot of the same thing. Like they can relate on a deeper level that my behavior might look like this for me, but underneath that is this fear, or underneath it is this anger that I've had or resentment or whatever reason it was. So that's one of the cool things about it is we can get people together that their behavior might look different, but then they realize kind of in the end that the answer is kind of the same through the process that we put them through. So.
Well, and it's, it might be, so in formal drug treatment, it might be a little sort of shocking or maybe even like alarming, one of the statements that we make, and maybe more so for people who don't directly suffer from it, but when families come in and I'm talking to them about their loved ones, I will say something like, drugs and alcohol are not the problem here.
Mm-hmm.
And people, they kind of look at me sideways and go, what do you mean drugs? Wait a minute. Drugs and alcohol are why we're here, right? Isn't this a drug and alcohol treatment center? And I go, yes. The first thing that you have to do is sort of put the plug in the jug, right? Like you have to stop the behavior, whatever that behavior is. But that can be a very quick process sometimes, even if somebody needs like a detox or something like that, right? Once we get some sort of stabilization where I'm not having these intense cravings and I'm not in a withdrawal, symptoms or anything like that, once the drug use has stopped or any other behavior,
right,
then we start to really do the work that happens in a treatment center. And it sounds like you guys are doing the same kind of work at Celebrate Recovery. Is now we're going to look at causes and conditions.
Yeah.
Now we're going to look at underlying issues. Now we're going to look at all the things that the patterns of thought, the patterns of emotion, the patterns of reactivity that cause the behaviors, right? And once we start to look at that, and it's amazing because like you say, the behaviors end up looking different, but the patterns behind them oftentimes look the same.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, okay, so now I come in, I would, gosh, as you're talking about the different groups, I'm thinking, I probably fit in 2 or 3 of those different groups, right? What happens when somebody does that?
Yeah. So that's a really common question. And I tell people too, I could quite literally go to any single of the men's groups we have and fit right in and not feel out of place at all. What we encourage people to do is to kind of pick one maybe that you relate to most, or maybe one that you just kind of stands out to you and stick with it. And the reason for that is because we want to encourage that community, and you kind of see the same people week after week, and you can start to build on those relationships. And that's really healthy. And it's not uncommon that after a period of time, some of the people that come there for one thing will end up in a different group entirely because they kind of realize that, oh, this was a root, or this was something underneath that, was really a problem that I need to look at now. So that's also a common thing that happens.
So, for anybody who's listening that, sometimes we'll joke around. Like, because we're in recovery, we can kind of joke about the past issues to make light of it a little bit and stuff like that. But, never interpret that as us not taking these things seriously.
Yeah.
Addiction in any or all of its forms is a very, very serious issue. And so when I sort of say with a smile or laughing a little bit, I could fit in any one of those groups, it's only because I'm on the other side of those issues.
Sure.
But I say that because I want people to understand that most people who come into a recovery process, for whatever reason, that there is most of the time a multitude of issues going on. I've seen some studies that say that generally speaking, there's 5 different things that are going on with any individual that comes into a treatment center. And what I mean by that is there may be 3 different substances that they're abusing, but there also might be some some infidelity going on, or maybe some spending habits over here, or some mental health issues going on over here, or maybe some underlying trauma or abuse or neglect or whatever. So usually people come in, they have all these different issues. And the reason I asked you about what group do I fit in is because oftentimes what happens is I pick a group because that's my most glaring issue. So let's say I come in and my life is falling apart from drugs and alcohol. Clearly, I need to get a hold on that. So I jump into this men's drug and alcohol group. But what happens, and we see it a lot in treatment, is when I start working on one issue, because my brain has used that as a coping skill, it automatically says something like, oh, heck no, we need to do something to not feel this. And sometimes the other issues might even get worse.
Absolutely.
And so all of a sudden I might have this, like maybe maybe issues that are from 5 or 10 years ago that are of a sexual nature, and now I'm working on my drug issues, and I get a hold on that, and this other stuff starts coming up again.
Very
like
common.
all of a sudden I want to start doing that again. So simultaneously we need to work on those issues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that just kind of comes down to that whole, we've learned, for me, I can speak to myself with the doing drugs for so long. I kind of learned this, it's just like escapism. Like if I feel, whatever the feeling is, I feel a certain way, and I need to use the drug to not feel that way. When I first got into recovery, that's exactly what happened with me, where some of these other areas came up because my brain was still in that cycle of, well, okay, if you're not going to use the drugs, you still got to escape. You can't feel these emotions. Like, you have to do something else. And that's where a lot of the, like, Celebrate Recovery and therapy and a lot of the other stuff I've been a part of has really helped me, like, realize I have to face those things and not go around them and just replace one addiction for another.
Yeah, I've heard, and certainly, again, not making light of anything, but I heard somebody in recovery sort of jokingly say, you have to look at them all. If you don't look at them all, it's kind of like switching deck chairs on the Titanic, like you're still going down, right? But, and so we have to start to face all the different issues as we go along. Another analogy is something like this, drugs and alcohol and the behaviors that we're talking about don't fix any of the issues. What they do is they allow us to not have to face them, to not have to feel the pain of the way that we're living. And so we sort of, as we're going along and we're participating in all these different behaviors, it's almost like we're driving along in a station wagon, and every time a problem comes up, we take a drug and we just throw the problem in the back of the station wagon, right?
Yeah.
And so we've been driving around for a year, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, and throwing all our problems in the back seat. And when we get into recovery, it's the first time that we are sort of forced to face the real conditions of our life. So it's almost like running the station wagon into a brick wall, and all of those problems that have been sitting in the back come flying to the front.
Yeah.
And now I'm up to here in problems, and you're telling me that I need to stay clean and sober, and I need to not run to any of those other behaviors, and I need to face all this stuff. And I'm like, oh my God, where do I start?
Yeah.
And so recovery is not for, I was going to say it's not for like, it takes guts, it takes guts to be able to recover. It's the reason that our so-called success rates are not as high as we'd like them to be. It's the reason that so many people give up is because, and I say this often to the clients because I like to be real with them, that if you're going to succeed in the recovery process, it's probably going to be the most difficult thing that you've ever done in your life. Yeah. And on some level, you're going to get to do it for the rest of your life. And that's the truth about it, is it's not going away, and you have to face it, because what's the alternative? The alternative is not very good. But if you do that, I can promise you, and it doesn't matter, how you're doing it, Celebrate Recovery, any other 12-step, treatment centers, therapy, or all of the above, that if you do that and you stick in the process and you really chip away at those issues, that recovery from any kind of addiction can be the most profound, joyous life path that you've ever experienced, right? Yeah. It becomes this big, beautiful thing where we're living in the sunlight of the Spirit, if you will.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
So when we come back, I want to hear your personal journey through this and how you ended up, because I'm amazed at, what God's been doing in your life and how you ended up as the pastor at Celebrate Recovery, because it's just a beautiful journey to hear. So I'm Bob Sheritz. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour. We will be back in a couple of minutes. Welcome back to the Way Out Recovery Hour. I'm Bob Sheritz, and if you are just joining us, go back. So one of the things that we do in the Way Out Recovery Hour is on KHTS Facebook page, on the Way Out Recovery SCV Facebook page, and today on Celebrate Recovery at Real Life Church Facebook page, you'll be able to go back and watch the video. So if you're just joining us live or watching us on Facebook Live or listening to 98.1 FM KHTS, you can always go back and listen to the front half of the show. We have been in here talking about Celebrate Recovery. which is a 12-step program for many forms of addiction and other issues that meets at 7 p.m. at Real Life Church every Friday. However, you show up at 6 o'clock and you can have dinner ahead of time with the wonderful folks over there. And if it's your first time, dinner is free. Stay for the meeting. If you've been there before, it's $5 for dinner and stay for the meeting. And so, but it doesn't cost $5 for the meeting. That's all free, right? So it's a support group at Real Life Church on Fridays at 7 p.m. And today in studio with us, we have Chris Freeman, who is the Celebrate Recovery pastor at Real Life Church. And so go back and listen to the first half if you missed it, and you can hear about the wonderful things that are going on at Celebrate Recovery. I am so Chris is a personal friend of mine. I'm glad to have you on the show today, Chris. And I'm amazed by, and I'll say it again, I'm amazed at what God is doing with your life. God has placed you in a position, and being in the recovery world has placed you in a position, and being open to the recovery process and the work that you've done personally has placed you in a position to be able to take probably the thing that you thought was the worst thing that could ever happen in your life and turn it into being able to help and point people in the direction of doing the same thing that you're doing. And so I am so amazed at what's happening in your life, and really, really grateful that you're on the show today.
Thank you, Bob.
How long ago did we meet?
I think it was about 6 years ago.
Right.
We met in an IOP. You were one of my counselors.
Was it a good? Did you come singing in and go, "Yay, man! So happy to meet you, man! It's the greatest point in my life right now."
Yeah, not that I can.
Not
recall.
like that.
No, I don't think that's how it went down. But yeah, real quick before I forget, because I'm afraid I'm going to forget this. We do meet every Friday at 7 o'clock. However, this Friday is the one Friday of the year Celebrate Recovery does not meet at Real Life Church.
Okay.
I just want to clarify that.
Because Real Life is putting on their Christmas
services. So we'll still have a Christmas service at 7 if you guys want to check it out. But yeah, Celebrate Recovery is not.
Well, I tell you what, Real Life Church puts on a heck of a service, you know. So if you need something on Friday, find yourself at Real Life Church. If you don't want to do that, there's lots of other 12-step meetings that are happening on Fridays as well.
Yeah.
This is the only Dark Friday
of the year
for Celebrate Recovery of the year, this coming Friday. So any other time, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you for mentioning that.
Thanks, Bob. I just didn't want to forget.
That's right.
People show up Friday
and
like,
go, wait a minute.
What's going on? Yeah, but thank you for having me on. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd be happy to share a little bit of my story about kind of how I got to where I am today. But part of my story, I grew up in Lancaster, live out there now. I was adopted by my grandparents. And I usually start the story there because a lot of people don't know, at least it was true for me, the effect that just the being adopted had on my life. And what I mean by that is growing up, you're in school, I always kind of felt like I was a bit of an outcast, like I didn't really fit in. And part of that was other kids had their moms and dads, and kids like to ask, like, well, where's your mom and dad? Why don't you have your mom and dad? And, innocently, but every time it happened, it was kind of just like this, a bit of a dagger, like, you don't have that. And part of that, I didn't know it at the time, I didn't realize this till just a few years ago, was this, like, rooted belief that I must not have been good enough for them.
Right.
And that belief kind of, and the truth was, that's not the truth. The truth was they struggled with drugs and alcohol themselves. And because of that, they weren't able to, do their they did the best they could with what they had, put it that way.
Isn't it freeing to be able to see that oftentimes the story in our head is not the truth?
The truth, yeah.
That was freeing for me to realize that I had been sort of lying to myself my entire life with that same idea. I'm not good enough. I'm a failure. I'm a mistake. Whatever that looks like.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's real freedom in being able to come to terms with that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And really come to terms, not just know it intellectually, but to like feel it in your heart. That's been one of the amazing things that recovery and Celebrate Recovery and therapy and a lot of other things have done for me, has been able to really believe that no, I'm not a mistake. I'm not a burden to anyone. Like it's just, the circumstances are what they were. But growing up, I also, I had some abuse in my early childhood, physical, sexual abuse, and all of that kind of culminated into this, some of the mental health issues that I struggle with, which still are, I still have them, which is like the PTSD and the depression. And granted, I didn't know any of this until just a few years ago when I was diagnosed with it. But for me, it was just normal. That's what life was. So I grew up with that. And then it wasn't until high school, till someone offered me a little pain pill one day in class and said, "Here, try this. You'll probably like it." And I tried it. And you put it this way one time. It was the perfect example of what it was like for me. It was like I was in a room. Like my whole life, I'd been in a room with like a fan on, and then
buzzing going
on, and you don't notice it until it turns off, and then you realize how quiet the room is.
Right.
And that was exactly what it was like for me. I didn't realize that this wasn't normal, that all this noise that was in my head was noise. And when I took that pill, it kind of took over and turned that off for me. So I was kind of honestly off to the races from there after high school, and pain pills were just my go-to because they kind of drowned out all that noise.
And when you're talking about pain pills, just for clarification,
Sure.
You're talking about primarily opiates.
Opioids, yeah.
Right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. And as you know, and I think a lot of people know, with addiction comes a progression. So your body builds up a tolerance, and
Right.
you have to do more and more to get the same effect that you had before. So it started getting out of hand in my probably early 20s. And about that time, I met I met a girl, and I liked this girl, and I wanted to impress her. So she was going to this little group thing that this pastor put on at his house over the summer for college kids. It was like they didn't call it Bible study, but
Like
that's
a life
kind of what it
group
was.
or something?
Kind of like a life
Yeah.
group kind of thing. And I had no interest in going to be a part of that, but I had an interest in this girl. So I went to try to kind of appease her. And it was through that I met this pastor that was this very kind-hearted man, Pastor Danny Gardner, and he just kind of took me under his wing. And he was this male figure in my life that was really kind and nice to me. And so there's something about that was appealing, because a lot of the men in my early life had this kind of rough, abusive side to them. So to have someone that didn't have that just wanted, to look out for me was different. So I kind of gravitated towards him, and kind of long story short, it was through meeting him that I kind of first admitted that I had a problem and that I wanted to stop. And that led to me getting into my first treatment center, my first of 4.
Okay.
So sometimes it isn't just a one and done kind of thing.
Well, and I think it's important. I think it's important to step in and say this, that
Yeah.
if you're hearing that, oh my God, 4 treatment centers, it doesn't mean treatment doesn't work.
Correct.
What it means is that sometimes we need multiple exposures
Yeah.
to different types of treatment
Absolutely.
for the message to sink in.
Yeah,
You know?
and that's a perfect. So the first treatment center I was in, it gave me some time. The biggest lesson I learned from my first treatment center is I got out, and every time I was in there, everyone told me, you need to follow up on aftercare, you need to do this, you need to go to meetings. But that, for me, I was the exception. That was true for everyone
That's what
else.
your head told you, right?
Yeah. In my head, I was the exception. So I didn't go to meetings after.
Right.
And you can guess where that led me. So I lasted 2 or 3 months
Right.
before I relapsed. And that's when I relapsed then, they say you pick up right where you left off. And that's what my story was. And because of that, it got to the point where the pain pills were like getting too expensive to maintain.
Right.
So the cheaper alternative, which this is a common way this happens, is the cheaper alternative was heroin.
Right, and that is. I'm glad you mentioned that. That is sort of more of a typical route than it used to be, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's part of the reason why so many addicts look like not what our typical picture looks
Yes.
like. And today's addict is not,
No.
it's not that guy behind the dumpster,
Exactly.
dirty, shooting dope. It's not
the
that
soccer
guy,
mom.
right?
It's the guy with the
Right.
the job that lives out here. You wouldn't ever think. I mean, the people exactly. I'm glad you touched on that, Bob. It's not what you typically think, like stereotypically for someone. who
Which, for
struggles with that
somebody
stuff.
who's sitting out there thinking about getting into the recovery process,
Yeah.
you're not going to be sitting in the room with what you might picture or consider
Exactly.
as an alcoholic or a drug addict or whatever.
Yep.
It's folks just like you.
Yeah.
you
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I got out of that treatment center, and when I started doing heroin, it was how earlier you mentioned there's the different things. I started doing other drugs like Xanax, and it just got really bad really fast.
Right.
And that's when the hopelessness really started to set in my life, and it was like it was like the more hopeless I got, it was like the less options I thought I had. And the one option that seemed like it was the most, became more and more like it was the only option, was suicide.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's just where my mind kept going. And every day, more and more my thought process was taken up by how I do it, why I should do it, writing letters to family members.
I think it's important for those listening that may not understand addiction.
Yeah.
That the person who is using, if they are an addict, if they're in that spot, that if you're an outsider looking at that, they're not doing it for fun anymore.
Yeah.
They're not doing it. It's not a party anymore.
No.
And that there's this really hopeless cycle that a person gets stuck in, where it feels like it's absolutely impossible to break that cycle.
Yeah.
I'm so ashamed of what I'm doing.
Yeah.
That I have to do more so that I don't think about or feel the way that I feel for doing the thing. And so you see how the pattern goes, right? And then there's one option in that. And this becomes an option. It seems like there's only one option.
That's what it feels like in the moment, yeah.
And that is, like, how can I get out of this? And for some people, unfortunately, they end up following through with this.
Yeah.
But they feel like suicide is the only way out.
Yeah. Yeah, and it is unfortunate, and that's why, that's one thing, just to touch on that too, of I talk about it all the time when I teach, to just encourage people, if you're feeling that way, if you're thinking those thoughts in any way, shape, or form, to not feel any shame in reaching out and talking about it, because there are people that care, that don't, that don't want you to obviously follow through on that, even if because in the moment it feels like that no one does, that you're just alone in it. But that part of that was really what propelled me to getting into my second treatment center. Thankfully, I had a family member. It just happened, it was my aunt. She happened to come by one day and pick me up, and for whatever reason, I told her really what was going on, and she helped me get into a treatment center later that week, and it was a really good program. And like you said, it was like what I learned from the first one. I need aftercare. That was my big lesson. Right. The second one, I learned that I was ready during the second one, and there was a guy in there that was a counselor, and he said, well, the good news is you only have to change one thing. The bad news is that's everything.
Right.
And I know it sounds kind of funny, but I took that to heart. And so I moved from Lancaster out here to Santa Clarita with my aunt and uncle. I got really involved. That's where I met you when you were a counselor. And you're still a counselor. But you were a counselor back then, too. But I got involved. I got a really good therapist. I got involved in 12-step meetings out here, one of which was Celebrate Recovery. And I just really kind of gave myself to the recovery process. And I mean, I always say, like, they could have told me to do anything. I would have done it because I was ready. And I knew I couldn't go back to the way I was living before.
So I know that there's one more relapse in your story in between.
Yes,
there, correct?
Yeah.
So how do you get from I'm willing to do everything,
of course,
right, like to I relapse again? And I think it's important for people to hear that is you can, even if you're giving it your all, sometimes relapse still happens.
Yeah, and the way it happened with me, so that girl that I met originally, we became married, we had kids, and life was great. I had a good job, things were going well out here. But about 3 years into my recovery, I started getting really complacent. And what I mean by that is I stopped going to the meetings that were working for me. I stopped reaching out to my sponsor like I knew I needed to. And before I knew it, I was in a position where I just wasn't doing the things that were working for me, because somewhere in my head I did some mental gymnastics and justified that I could go back to what I was doing before, and I'd be okay. It was a different drug, but it was still a relapse.
Right.
It was just complacency, not doing what I knew worked. So I had to go into another treatment center after that again. And when I came back from that, I'll kind of wrap it up with my story here. It was obviously very difficult for my wife because we had a little daughter at that time. And she was struggling with the whole when I was gone in treatment, she was trying to survive. So when I got out, she was able to kind of start to process her feelings. And it was ugly. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It was ugly. We didn't know if we were going to make it. Because it was very difficult. Because I was processing my relapse, she was processing her feelings. And one of the cool things that happened was we both decided to, and this is one of the reasons I like that it's inclusive to everyone, is we both got in a step study at the same time at Celebrate Recovery. And we worked through the steps separately, but kind of together, and that they were happening at the same time. And it was through that process that we both came out of it. She got to work on her stuff. I got to work on mine, really like why I relapsed, which really came down to that complacency and not taking it seriously like I should. And because of it, we're stronger than ever today. And that's one of the amazing things that it's not exclusive to us, my wife and I, our story, but it happens where, sometimes couples can come together and have that same experience. And the way I got into being the ministry leader there is Juan Palomino, who's the pastor there before. When I first got out of treatment, he came to me. He just taken over as pastor for Celebrate Recovery, and he told me they had this mental health initiative they wanted to launch, and he needed someone to do it. And I thought he was crazy for asking me because I was a mess, but there was something in that gave me like this sense of purpose that I actually got to work through and do something that I was passionate about. And I'll forever be grateful for that because I truly think it's one of the reasons I'm sober today. But through that process, Juan got called to go somewhere else, still within Real Life Church, and they needed someone. And I was so involved with the ministry at that point.
You're the guy.
Put my name in the hat. I started meeting with some of the guys, and the rest is history. So
yeah, neat. And you've been, it's fun. I'm going to ask you anyway. How long you been clean now?
A little over 2 years.
Nice. Congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that. And the reason I'm a little bit resistant to asking that is because although a certain amount of time is important for us,
Sure.
although it's nice for me to be able to go, count the days, whatever,
Yeah.
right? Is that I never want anybody to ever think that because I go, well, I have 2 years, doesn't mean that those 4 years prior to that or longer
Exactly.
were ever wasted.
Yes.
It's all part of the process.
Exactly.
And so you've been in the recovery process for a number of years, right?
Yeah.
And relapsing is, I almost think, now certainly I'm not encouraging anybody to ever relapse, right? But
Yeah.
I almost think that in some ways relapse is beneficial to the recovery process because we get to learn some things about ourselves that we may not have known in that process.
Yeah.
It's never a failure.
Yeah.
It's always a learning process, and the only way that we don't learn from it is if we relapse and we go, well, none of it works,
Right.
and I'm leaving, and
Yeah.
walk away from it, right?
Yeah.
And then I think that, that addiction is so strong that somewhere down the line, we're going to be forced to make a decision again anyway.
Yeah.
And so maybe the relapse will last for 5 or 10 years, but at the end of that, we're going to be in the same spot
Yeah.
with a few more problems now, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so let me say a couple of things. Is congratulations to you and Tracy for sticking it out.
Thanks.
Right?
Yeah.
And to your two beautiful daughters.
Yeah.
What are their names?
Riley and Aubrey.
Riley and Aubrey. And as a result of that, I'll bet you that this holiday season is going to be like no other for you guys, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What is, if you could put in a word in the last couple of years or how long you been running the Celebrate Recovery over there?
Gosh, only 6 or 7 months I've been in charge of it, yeah. I've been attending it for 6 years.
Certainly without maybe using any names or
Yeah.
anything like that. What's something that sticks out to you in terms of miracle that you've seen over there?
Oh, man.
Aside from
So
your
many to
own,
count.
right?
Yeah, I mean, marriages that were divorce lawyers were fighting it out that got redeemed before like the final signature went through. People that have been in crazy life. I don't want to get too into it because I give away details, but crazy life circumstances with very bad people,
Right.
that came back and you couldn't do more of a 180. And then the people, of course, anytime someone has a day from being sober or clean from drugs and alcohol, there's so many people that have those. I tell people when they're like, "Oh, I only have 2 days." It's like, no, you have 2 days. That's a miracle.
That's right.
And so many of those stories, it's just amazing to be able to see that transformation happen time and time again. Over there at Celebrate Recovery.
I think the biggest miracle for any of us is that we stopped long enough to ask somebody for help.
Yeah.
We stopped long enough to walk through the door of Celebrate Recovery or Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous
Yeah.
or a treatment program or whatever, or our family or to our pastor or whoever and say, I cannot do this anymore.
Yeah.
And the miracle takes place in that moment of surrender, and then
Humility,
then we just got to keep the work going after that.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And if I could say anything, it would be that recovery happens. Not only does recovery happen, but recovery happens to a lot of people. And miraculous changes take place as a result of that surrender, and it feels like it's a fight coming in, and the exact opposite is true. As we throw up our hands and say, "I give. I can't do this anymore."
Yeah.
And that allows other people to help us. So
Absolutely.
I am so grateful for you to be on the show today.
Thanks, Bob.
Celebrate Recovery meets at 7 o'clock every Friday at Real Life Church, except for this Friday. It's the only Friday black. And come on over there. Give us a call at the way out, 296-4444. We can direct you and guide you. Chris Freeman, you are an amazing human being. I love you very much.
I love you too, Bob. Thank you for having me on today.
I'm Bob Sheritz. This is the Way Out Recovery Hour, and we'll be back next week.